здорово всем.
Добрый вечер. Сегодня у нас особенный FreeTalks, как всегда. Они всегда особенные,
да,
но сегодня у нас будет маленький или длинный разговор с Заком Смитом. Давай в двух словах опишем для людей, кто, может, не знакомы с Заком Смитом. Сань, кто это такой вообще?
Что ты такое?
Кто ты такой?
Так, ребята, Зак Смит, в принципе, довольно известная личность в англоязычном RPG комьюнити. И, в принципе, довольно известная даже в русскоязычном комьюнити, особенно среди поклонников ОСР. Дело в том, что Зак — это гениальный гейм-дизайнер, я так считаю, автор огромного количества просто хитовых дополнений к Lamentations of the Flame Princess, ну и также к другим ОСР совместимым системам. Возможно, вы слышали такие названия, особенно мы с Виталиком недавно вспоминали, как Vornheim, потом Maze of the Blue Medusa, огромный, очень психоделичный, очень красивый мега-данжен. Потом Frostbitten and Mutilated, это новая его какая-то книга. Потом одно из самых известных и самых крутых дополнений Lamentations of the Flame Princess называется A Red and Pleasant Land. И так далее, и так далее. Недавно Зак успешно профинансировал свою новую игру на Кикстартере, которая называется Demon City. Про это мы тоже поговорим. Это такое очень модерновое, постмодернистское какое-то урбан фэнтези с элементами хоррора. Услышите, увидите.
Кто все это вам не интересно? Он человек, который играл с Сашей Грей в ДНД, и у него была достаточно известная одна из первых программ вообще, которая вышла в интернет, когда люди играют в ДНД, и это снимают, так называемый шоу I Hit It With My Ex. Так что давайте пойдем и поболтаем с Заком, а потом вернемся обратно после интервью и обсудим
да.
Что это вообще происходит.
Да. Все, стартуем!
Yeah, there you go. So Zach, nice to meet you. My name is Vitaly. You talk to Alexander on Twitter and everywhere else. We are a kind of a gaming community from the Russian-speaking world, so we are all the way from the east, right?
You do a really good Russian accent.
Yeah, because we speak Russian normally. I'm doing the English accent now. I put on the English face at the moment. So we kind of...
accent sucks. I don't believe you at all.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying.
You sound like American. This is bullshit. I don't believe you at all. You just want me up at 11 p.m.
Yeah. So we're sitting right there, right, in a few blocks away from you. We couldn't get to you from the English world, and we needed to pose as the Russians, so we would seem more exotic. So we're kind of a community that we do all kinds of role playing. Where role playing is just starting out here. Tabletop role-playing, and people were really excited. One of the people that they wanted to call us was you, because a lot of people are getting into old-school gaming in OSR, and of course, Lamentations of the Flame Princess.
Yeah.
And there are people who still are watching your stuff, like I Hit It With My Ex, right?
Yeah. So, it's really popular here. So
people really, they don't have maybe the chance to always watch it because there's a language barrier. They can't talk to you. So this little talk is going to be subbed for all the Russian-speaking community, and they can know a little bit about you, about what you're doing. So Zach, I think we can jump right into our first thing, and that is the Demon City, of course. How is that going?
Yeah.
How is your project moving on?
Basically, I did all the most important art and the writing for it, and then we launched the Kickstarter. So and after that, all of the writing from the other contributors come in, which is mostly like extra stuff, like specific setting bits rather than the nuts and bolts of the system. Like, this will be an interesting idea for an adventure. So that and monsters. So they do that, and then the graphic designer gets going. And graphic design takes forever in games. But basically, while those things are happening, because they're going to take, graphic design especially is going to take a while, and then printing, I'm just making sure everything's nailed down, making sure doing some playtesting, proofreading, making sure mechanics work and stuff like that, because the final draft was before the Kickstarter started, so I just want to make sure, okay, we've got every single thing. And then with every game that has a list of powers or spells or anything, there's interactions to check for, like, the game works, but you want to double check as many of those as possible. Like, if you've got telekinesis and you've got vomiting blood,
How does that work out?
I feel a little bit easier in horror games because usually only one side has the power. You know, only one side is breaking the rules. And so it's a little bit easier to test, but still you want to make sure. So I'm doing that while Sean Cheng is coming back to me with these graphic design ideas, which are, it sounds like a little thing if you don't know if you haven't made a game, but like, especially on the stuff we make, making it look understandable.
Oh yeah.
I mean, especially like if you're, there's probably people who read English but don't speak it, you know? So if you're getting an American game, you know, you want it to be extra clear, you know, because the grammar is not going to be, you know, and you know, no matter what language you speak, when you've got it at the table, you want it to be like, if you're in the middle of a game, you want to be able to understand things quickly, and when you hand it to new players, you want it to look accessible. And so getting things like a little flow chart to show how combat works, or a flow chart for how to make character creation, are things that, you know, Cheng is doing that most graphic designers don't do. And then making the charts like a simple thing, like we have a D100 table, and most people that's a list and then 100 numbers, and we made it into sort of like a giant word cloud, so the numbers are really big and the big ones are big, but the numbers are also big, so it's easy to read because everything's so big, but it's also kind of like a fun thing to look at, like, you know, the bigger, you know, 100 panic symptoms, it's like, you know, like you think there's bugs on you, you know, and the words are kind of screaming out at you. And Cheng found a way to make that like really readable. So like those are things that they matter a lot to me, and they matter, I think, when you get the game in your hands, you'll be like, oh yeah. Like I feel like the first time I got Warhammer 40K in my hands, like the old Rogue Trader, the original from the 80s, and you just look at it and you're like, whoa, you know, and you know it's going to be awesome before you read any of the rules because it's communicating so much by how it looks. So we really want that to land on people like that. So so graphic design is actually a huge thing.
Yeah,
it really reminds me actually, like of all of your other works. Like before we got here, we were looking through Vornheim, right? And all of this, I think one of the many great things about this book is some of the design elements, right? The pictures, the big letters, the cover of it. So Demon City is going to get that boost also, and that is amazing. That's really good. It's really about accessibility and about reading it.
Yeah, that's true. And like question for me. So what was the inspiration for this game, for like how it looks and
for the Demon City, right?
Yeah, Demon City, right.
Well, a big part of it was how, like, I would run Call of Cthulhu at home sometimes, and games would always go to a specific kind of place. Like, people would always piss off the cops. Everybody would have guns. Like, and it wasn't exactly Lovecraft, but we liked it. You know, it's just sort of, and I thought at the time, I was like, it's kind of nosebleed noir, because I was thinking about how psychics always have nosebleeds in movies, you know?
Okay, yeah, yep.
Like, sort of, there's a sort of desperation, and they're like, oh no, I gotta get a chocolate. There's a scene in like Firestarter where he's like, has to get a chocolate bar out of the candy machine because they're on the run. Okay. And I was like, that was like such, for some reason that scene just stuck into my head for the rest of my life. It was just like you're a psychic, but you're not like Marvel Girl, like knocking people's heads against the wall. You're like, I'm really trying to get a candy bar out of this candy machine because I'm hungry and I'm hiding from the police, and then it lands and he gives half of it to the little girl. It's like, there was this atmosphere that was like, it was modern, it wasn't really Lovecraftian. Call of Cthulhu was a great game for it, but it was like, there was a very specific thing, and there wasn't really a crime horror game. And the other influence was, the year before, I had been asked to I work with White Wolf.
Okay.
A video game I did for them, and then after that I was a consultant on the 5th edition of their game. And nothing makes you want to make a game like working for a big company and then like giving them a bunch of ideas, and then they go, you know. So I had a whole bunch of ideas left after that.
Okay.
So I was like, you know, I just like dreamed up all this stuff, and so I was like, all right, I'll do my own thing, you know, because I really was like taking it in a completely different direction than what the vampire fan base would have wanted anyway. So it was probably better off that I, you know, so, you know, and then, so yeah.
That's interesting because as soon as you started talking about White Wolf, that struck me in the head because the first impression from Demon City that I've had running through Kickstarter was it reminds me of like very mature version of World of Darkness, where you play mortals, actually the regular World of Darkness. So and it's more like grittier and I don't know, mature, I'd say. I don't know. Yeah.
So something that maybe you couldn't put out for V5, right?
Yeah.
Put it into Demon City. That's exciting, actually.
And it looks cool. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, when this always happens when you work with a big company, is they come to you and you go, I want to do this, and they go, that's what we want. That's why we're coming to you. And then you go, all right, here we go, and they go, whoa, you know. So like, if you see the video game that I did for them, I mean, it was a small scale project. It was a handheld mobile game that was all done with texting, but. Oh. I was like, I want to do like you have like a, you know, like you get on the bus, you're on the bus. Like that was my big idea. You're a vampire, and they're like, we want to do one where you like become the vampire, like it's the beginning, it's a prelude. So I'm like, all right. I'm like, you're on a bus. And I was just like, that was my whole idea. It's like a Breaking Bad bus. It was like the opposite of the vampire, you know, like the fancy, like the red velvet, you know, like the opposite of the vampire image. Is just like, the first scene's on a bus, and for some reason, like that, like level of just sort of like gritty, but not just the gritty in terms of like, oh, it's violent, but gritty in terms of like low budget, you know, like I think the desperation of the situation was what interests me, and that's obviously not something that you can't sell the whole vampire game on that, because you have to have all the Maria, you have to have, you know, like all this, but that was my image. And so that is kind of what Demon City built on, was that this sort of like low rent kind of low budget.
That's really awesome.
That's cool. We're actually excited for the book to appear, and then we're going to be we're definitely going to try and see what we can push out of it. You know, this sounds like an exciting system to play with. All right, Zach, we jumped really ahead. Let's start from the very beginning. How did you start or end up with tabletop role-playing RPGs? When did it all start for you?
I mean, I was a kid when they were popular, and so that was the beginning, you know. It was like we were playing Rifts and Shadowrun and the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, and a little bit of D&D and stuff like that when I was a kid. And then I think the first books I got were, if anyone's out like knows all this stuff, AD&D's Unearthed Arcana and the Red Box Basic book. Those books don't mix together at all. Like, but I kind of I understood how to play the game from the Red Box, and I understood that they were technically different games because TSR is very clear on that. Like, AD&D and Basic are different games. So I was like, they're different games. And then I read, but I didn't understand Unearthed Arcana at all. But I kind of loved that I didn't understand it. Like, it was so. I think that was the appeal of those early books, is that they feel like a magic book because they don't explain anything, you know, and you're just like, it feels like it was full of secret knowledge, you know. That book had like all these magic items in the back, you know, and they were just like, what even is that, you know? So that kind of not knowing what's going on feeling was a huge part of it. And then, you know, I had life for a while after being a kid, and stopped, went to school, did a whole bunch of stuff. And then when I was doing porn movies, my girlfriend, like years later, she was sick a lot at home, and so we couldn't go out that much. And my other friend, Satine, who was also doing movies, was like, I want to play D&D. And I was like, oh, this is perfect because that gets people to come here. So I was like, oh, it'll be like the three of us, you know. And so I went and I looked at the time it was like 3.5 or 4 was about to come out. And so I looked at the books and I figured out how to kind of run the game again, remembered. And then ran a couple games, and then everybody got excited. Everybody we knew was like, what are you guys doing? You know, and it became like the poker night. And it was like people who came over, and I was like, I don't know if you're going to be into this. It's maybe not your thing. And they'd be like, oh my God, this is so fun, you know, like, so it kind of became like just sort of the thing to do. And that was kind of this thing that started happening all over LA and Hollywood. Like in the beginning, finding a group in LA was like like there wasn't one. You know, you'd look on the group finder things in like Los Angeles, there was nobody. But then you'd start to find out like screenwriters and like writers and like movie people, and then Satine started doing the celebrity D&D games and charity D&D games at the comic book store down here, Meltdown, and Meltdown was like kind of like, it's like kind of a big, because there's Guitar Center, which is like this giant, like that's the Sunset Strip Guitar Center. That is like where every, like that's where Lemmy buys his new guitars. Like that's where Motley Crue buys. It's a giant, So like a couple doors down is Meltdown Comics, which is like the giant comic store, and it has all the models and stuff. And it's closed now, but at the time it was like they used to have comedy in the back, and they had podcasting out of there. The Geek and Sundry came out of there. Wow. And so Satine would run games there, and it just sort of became this thing where you learned about all these like comedians and like just this whole group of people that were playing or wanted to play. And then so yeah, and then meanwhile, like when we started our group again, I was blogging, and so eventually, somebody noticed the blog and wanted to put it on a web show and blah blah blah. So it all just kind of spiraled from there.
That's interesting.
Did all this like this little game with being a home game? How did it all spiral up to being the web series I Hit It With My Ex? Did this come to you, or did somebody find you? Do you think it was a successful show? What do you think?
I mean, it was okay. So basically, I started blogging, and then I had a bunch of readers. One of the readers was somebody who ran a video game website, and so that site contacted us and were like, "Hey, do you want to make a show?" And I had been thinking in my own head it would be funny just to do a little documentary because at the time the idea of like porn people playing D&D was way weirder than it is now. I feel like there's been a lot of like journalism in the last 10 years that's like, this is a weird thing, and there's sort of a lot of niche little, like if you Google like tomatoes on fire, you're gonna find a tomato on fire, right? Like boomerangtester.com, you're gonna find a guy who tests boomerangs. You know what I mean? So like everything exists now, and there's video of it. But at the time, it was like Dungeons and Dragons. Porn stars playing Dungeons and Dragons is probably not. And so I thought it was kind of funny, and so I was always kind of wanted to do video, like just little interviews or something. And then they were like, let's do a web series. And so that was about I would say like 6 months after I started blogging about the game, they came along. And then, the first episode, like millions of people watched it. But I mean, they were also like video game people in 2008. So a lot of them were like just total assholes, and a lot of them were like, they're girls playing D&D, this all must be a fraud, so I feel like there was a lot of like shitty sexism in the reactions, and also just a lot of people who didn't understand like that we were doing old school with house rules, and that I wasn't doing it wrong. You know what I mean? Like actually do what I was like, because they're they're people online, which means they're the worst. They're their worst selves, and so it was kind of
that is definitely true.
Yeah, and so there was that, and then also it was just like. It was on top of everything else we were doing, and they gave us a pretty small budget. And so it was me editing all the episodes, and someone's shooting and we had to pay everyone enough to not make porn that day. Because like, if you want to come over and play D&D, that's free. But if you want us to have cameras in the room and play for 8 hours so we can set it up and do an episode, you have to pay us. And so you're paying Sasha Grey enough money to not go make a porn movie that day. The budget left over to actually production compared to the shit you see now in actual play is ridiculous. It was that's my apartment, there's no backdrop, there's no, and so it was very low budget and very real. And people were just like, what the fuck? But on the other hand, I felt like it was super successful in the sense that everybody who did like it turned out to be a really, they got it, and they were interesting people. They were people who were like, oh yeah, this is how, you make up rules that are good. You do those, you play with your friends, these are grown-ups. The style of play and the sort of casual way that we shot it, I think brought in so many people who were exactly on the same wavelength as me who have later become like really interesting creators and writers. And then Satine, of course, now she's working at D&D. So, which started with, being on playing D&D with porn stars. So it's kind of, I think it was preposterously successful considering,
Hey, you'll be really surprised that this, although this has been almost 10 years, right? It's been a long time. When did this cut? So it still has the echo, which is coming this way, right? It is right. Little by little, it is moving out here. People are watching it now here. A lot of people. We got a comment when we had maybe 2 weeks ago, we talked with Satine, and somebody wrote us a comment that he will come and kill us if we do not do an interview with you.
Yeah.
Literally PM'd us. And I was like, okay, this guy's serious. We got to do this stuff or they're going to come for us. So definitely people loving this stuff. Do you think that now you're saying that there was a lot of hate, right? And a lot of people, it is the internet. This happens everywhere. We have experienced this with people who don't know what's happening, right? People who stumble upon these kind of videos. We're kind of at the same stage right here. Do you think that now it has absolutely changed? Would the reaction be different now, Zach, if you do this? Boom. We lost you there, Zach. Are you here? Sorry, Zach, we couldn't hear you for 1 second.
Hello?
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you hear us now?
Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. I think now there's so many shows. Like it was one of the first ones. It was one of the first D&D people playing D&D shows. So a lot of it was just like not like a lot of people were like, why would anyone watch anyone else play a game?
Yeah.
Which I was like, yeah, you have a point, which is one reason why it was an edited show rather than just a stream, but now it's fairly well established that there are people who will literally just watch other people play Dungeons and Dragons, and everybody gets that. So I think there would be just as much bullshit, but I think the tenor of the bullshit would be different. And I think that especially the sexism would be less accepted because there's now sort of a critical mass online of like, do not molest. Like that women being molested for entering sort of like game spaces is like a established idea. And so I think people would kick back a little bit more. But yeah, I think it would be different, but I think that, it's because the internet is different.
Yeah.
All right, so Zach, from sitting at home playing, then having a little game, then having your stream, how did you end up writing books? So this is our next thing. So this is all moving along. When did it come to you one day that, I don't know, you were drinking coffee and like, hey, I want to write a book?
I believe, so before you start, I believe that part of that was based on what you were doing in your blog, right? Because I know that a lot of, even the Vornheim is based on, articles from your blog. So is it true?
Yeah. Basically, once we did the show, people started coming to us with business offers, and they weren't very good. They'd be like, oh, we want to make like a miniature out of your goblin sketch. And I'm like, okay, how much? And like $300. And like, that's not a lot for, like, I mean, I have a job, making paintings and stuff. Like, that's my real job. And so I kind of know, like, and I had been reading the old school blogs. I had been reading whatever I could at the time because I was isolated, and I was just reading about, and the old school blogs were the only ones that were really long and involved or very creative. Like, that scene propagated itself through blogging, the old school D&D scene. Whereas the sort of people who are into the current edition or who are more into indie games were more on forums. And so they're harder to read. So the old school blogs were like things I would use the most accessible. And I was reading those. And I had saw this review of Death Frost Doom by Raji. And it was on Grognardia, which at the time in 2008, 2009, 2010, everybody was reading Grognardia who was in the old school scene. And Grognardia's comments were like a message board in itself. Yeah. Like, it was just like everybody was talking to each other. And so I was reading Grognardia, and he said, oh, there's a new thing out, and it's really interesting. And so it was $5. So I got it, and I ran my girlfriend through it. And it was a cool little module, but also I loved that there was a giant spider, and then it had its stats, and it was like 4 words long. And in that moment, I was like, oh, you can just do that. Like, you're like, oh yeah, it like D&D is not that complicated really. It has hit dice. And can bite you. The bite does damage, and so that's the stat took up like a tiny line, and the rest was writing, and art, and it was like, oh, this is like actually got a lot going on, and so I started following along with what James was doing, and his vibe was interesting to me, and also like because he's like a real heavy metal free speech dude. When we got, when people were giving us shit, he was like, he was like the first person to step up and defend us. He was like, like maybe he doesn't play D&D the way I do, but there's nothing wrong with any of the things that they're and that impressed me. And so when he was working on his own game, he started doing Lamentations of Flame Princess. Yeah. And he said, I need an editor. And it has somebody who will volunteer to sort of look at this, rip it apart. And that was at the time where you could just ask someone to volunteer rather than like pay them, just because they want. I was like, sure, I'll look at this because like I love reading this stuff. Like at the time, I loved reading anything. Like I was far enough away from. So I was reading it, and it was, and then after that, I was like, or maybe before, I was like, hey, do you want to do something? Because people keep asking me if I want to do some project with them, and the projects are always really stupid. But,
what do you mean they're always very stupid?
Like somebody asked me $300 to make a miniature.
Okay. These kind. I got it.
Other people were like, oh, we're doing a panel at Gen Con, and it's going to be like a sort of humorous sexuality panel. And I'm like, oh God.
Okay, I got the vibe.
Just like people were interested and wanted to sort of like make some money off of the show, but didn't know how. And so I was like, oh, we can tie it into the show. And that was at the time like a big picture. And he also was just like attracted like a moth to a flame to anything that would offend people or cause controversy. So he was like, yeah, let's do a book. And then I laid out options based on the notes and blog entries I had written in order to run my game. I was like, we could do something about this. And he said, well, for me, he said that cities always seem really boring to him in games. Because the city is where you go away from to go have your adventure, and he didn't know how to run a city, and so he said, well, do that, and which I thought was like a great thing to, rather than saying like what we need, he was like, what don't we need? Do that. What can't I do that? So I was like obsessed at that point with my page count, and I was like, I only have 64 pages. I have to give you the most you can possibly get in 64 pages because I'm going to use this book, and also you're reading the blog. This has to be like more useful than just reading it for free on the blog. Like I was obsessed with giving everyone value for money and packing it into those 64 pages. And so I was like, okay, we need to use the back cover to put something. We need to put something in the front cover. We need to like jam things in here. We need to make it really findable. And I was just like, as an art project, I was just thinking like the book has to increase the value of it, like the physical. Like if I'm asking you to buy a hardcover book, that has to make it more worth it than just buying a
has
PDF.
To look good. Yeah, it does look good.
But also, like for me, the idea of like reading RPG books on PDF was new at that time. Like I was like, oh my God, every single D&D book I've ever like read is like right here in this file on my computer. And I was like, if I'm gonna go for just wonderful format of PDF into physical object, I need to make it worth it. And so a lot of the little like tweaks and innovations and gimmicks in Vornheim were just because I was like, it's a book, like we need to make the book count. And then so yeah. And then the other thing was I was so unhappy with I guess I did not pay attention to the way modules usually worked because I just didn't think that they made sense, like the way that they were laid out. The way that most modules are laid out is either on the one hand, the early ones were just like get it on the page. Take your typewritten thing, mimeographic, get it there, send it to the people. Like, it's just, do it, whatever.
Yep.
And then the later ones just seemed like they were laid out to look expensive, but they weren't helpful. They weren't useful. Like, there was this ridiculous page in 4th edition where it's like the character sheet laid out with little lines to the character sheet, to everything in the character sheet. And it says, like, character name on the character sheet. And then there's a line going over to the other side, and it says, place your character's name here. Fuck you. Like, that's not what that format is for, And then they'd be like, place your class in the class box. And then I'm like, oh, there's the line. And the line does not then go to a list of classes. It goes, go to page 26 to see your classes. I'm like, there's nothing on this whole 2-page spread which helps you, which makes it easier. It just points out what the character...
Some ridiculous things, right? Yeah. Which are definitely obvious.
And spent any time around graphic designers, you immediately, your head spins, And so I was like, okay, what these people are doing is not going to help me at all. And so I didn't look at all at the way things have been done before and sort of did it from scratch. And then,
So Vornheim was the first thing, right? If I understood correctly, this was the first thing where you got into it. This is definitely an interesting thing that now that you mentioned it, and I'm starting to realize, like, all the puzzle pieces start to come together. That why do I like the book? Why do I like all these? Why am I when I'm holding it? You definitely put that thing in that now that there's no space wasted.
Yeah.
When I'm holding the book, I feel like that. When I'm reading a page, it has a meaning to it, right? It has some kind of consequential, like, something gets stuck in your head. Is it either it is some kind of shapes or designs, the way it is given. So this was something that was really important for him, and that's really cool. That's interesting. Now, the next thing that you mentioned, and we kind of like got away from it. You mentioned that you were working on the vampires, and this is actually an interesting thing that we didn't know actually, and it would be a great thing. Which parts which parts of your great ideas ended up in the book? Of course, all the best went to the Demon City. That's obvious. We already got the point. But what do you think? What was one of the best things that you pitched and got into the book?
Because the new book, it's really different.
It's different.
Yeah.
We are not one of those old school vampire maniacs. So don't worry. But it definitely came out different, and it's interesting.
I was basically, I didn't work on it. Basically what happened was there was a meeting in Stockholm, and it was me and Ken Hite and the art director Mary, and then the Swedes, the small group, and Jason Carr. It was like 3 people who were with the company, and then me, Ken, and Mary, who were supposed to kind of be the creatives and work with them. So we discussed ideas, and I was a consultant, and then I paid for that, and then went home. Like, that was my job. And then Ken was the one who had to read all the old vampire stuff, all of it, and then write all that, write most of that stuff. So he was on the hook to actually do work. So I don't know which of my, I haven't looked at the new book. It just came out around Gen Con. I haven't seen it. Okay. I've been on my own stuff. I've been working on, and also we didn't want to look at each other's stuff. Ken was like, I don't want to look at Demon City while I'm writing vampires. I don't want to fly. And I was like, I don't want to look at, because I have an NDA. So even though we talked about a bunch of ideas, we didn't want to do that. And so I haven't looked at it, and it came out. I know that they didn't do a lot of art. They did a lot of art, but they did a lot of photos, which...
was it photos? I think are they like redesigned? Maybe they're I don't know. There are a lot of photos. There's definitely a lot of character designs that were new. I think those were drawings.
Yeah, I don't know. They did both, but they did more photography than.
Yeah. Oh, they did it a lot. There was a lot.
And the reason why is because Mary, who they brought on, was she was a New York City art director. Like, she's done like videos with Kanye and fashion shoots. For, like, Vogue. So like they brought her on as a art director, and so instead of like doing like commissioning a bunch of paintings and then having their graphic designer kind of put them into the format, they gave Mary a lot of control. And so a lot of cases she was just like, let's just make a photo, I think. But so I don't know what I said made it in, if anything. I just know that, they took my ideas. I can tell you that Martin was very excited, like, to be like, it's gonna be new, it's gonna be totally new, like, we don't want, like, just pale goths, you know, like, it's going to be like, you know, he was very excited about
it definitely came out like that.
different ethnicities and different, you know, so I don't know, but that was his thing. It's like, he did, like, when I always said I wanted to be on a bus, you know, he was like, yeah, a bus, you know, so it was that kind of thing, sir.
All right, that's cool.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
All right, so Zach, I think the next thing that comes out, and this is actually an interesting thing. So we talked in the very beginning that you started from these classical old module, like old retro games, right? From the early D&D editions and stuff like that. When did all of the, let's say, not classical, maybe now the weird fantasy stuff, how did that end up in your book? Where do you get all the weirdness?
Inspirations,
yeah, because for all these things.
To be honest, well, personally, I believe that, you know, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, it has this atmosphere of being weird, but I believe that most of that comes from
you.
Books like Vornheim, A Red and Pleasant Land, and, you know, Maze of Blue Medusa and stuff like that. So where did you get an inspiration for that?
Where does this come from?
I mean, James definitely has some weird stuff in the books that he wrote. Like, and Zarkov, Kowalski's are also pretty weird. But for me, early Warhammer, like, you want, like, in the 1980s Warhammer, and a lot of people don't know the whole story with Warhammer because they just know what it's like now. Yeah. But in 1980s Warhammer was really, like, came out of the same scene as, like, British 2000 AD. So it was like early British punk rock metal aesthetics. And it was like sort of this satirical anti-Thatcher thing. So that was early Warhammer. And then I remember one of the artists on there, Ian Miller. There was a book that came out that was John Blanche and Ian Miller. And I got really into that. I was like, these are really cool artists, you know. And then Ian Miller put out a book with a separate book that with a writer called M. John Harrison. It was like a comic book called Viraconium, or like a big graphic novel. I picked that up and I really liked it. And I liked Ian Miller's art, but I also really liked the writing. And so I wrote that name down, like, M. John Harrison, Viraconium. I'm gonna go look this up. And then years later, I actually got it. You know, like it was just sort of name that sits in your notebook. And I read Viraconium, which is like from the 70s, and the 70s was, you know, sort of kind of a snake eating its own tail. But the 70s was like this late 60s with Moorcock, and the early 70s was this explosion of British weird science fiction authors. So it was like it was basically drugs, you know, like psychedelic sci-fi was what was happening. And if you look at the people and the overlap, it's like, well, Michael Moorcock was in this band Hawkwind, and Lemmy from Motorhead was also in Hawkwind. Yeah. Like, and then, you know, like, you can kind of see, like, there was this confluence of weird British sci-fi. So there were these ideas that were from surrealism, classical surrealism. The second Viraconium novel just reads like classical surrealist. If you didn't know that he had written a book about swords, you know, before, you wouldn't. And then the ones out, you know, there's a sci-fi. And so there's this sort of, like, new weird movement in British sci-fi, which actually then informed 2000 AD, and it informed Warhammer, and it also absorbed. It was the stuff that came right after most of the things in that influenced D&D. So people like Fritz Lieber, authors who did Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, and Conan and Lovecraft, they were like part of one pulpy generation. Yeah. Then there were these new British sci-fi people, starting with Moorcock, or influenced by Moorcock, influenced by J.G. Ballard, and those people influenced Warhammer. And then we were looking at Warhammer, and then we got to see all of that. And then and then, you know, China Mieville definitely came out of that 70s thing, and Neil Gaiman. They were both really influenced by that. So it was like, oh, you know, like, these people know each other. And then I have been reading, you know, a lot of, I drew a picture for every page of the novel Gravity's Rainbow, which is like mainstream literary fiction novel. It was one of, like, it was like, you know, Pulitzer Prize fodder or Nobel Prize fodder. I don't think it didn't win, but it, you know, it's a classic of Western literature, but it's also like got a lot of trippy sci-fi stuff in it. Yeah. So I was reading stuff like that. and I was interested in D&D. And so I was like crossing these things together. But also to me, they had always kind of gone together. You know, like if you look at the old Appendix N, if you look even at Lovecraft, Ken Hite brings this up.
Yeah.
Every single like thing that you shouldn't do that is not Lovecraftian, doesn't feel right, Lovecraft has done it in one of his stories, because they're all just figuring out as they go along too. You know, like so it's really just a question of making these things which seem incongruous fit back into what you're doing. Like, you know, in Tolkien, like you have all these halflings running around and they're smoking. Like that's not a natural, like that, like to at his time, like that was an invention that he created. That was a little cheeky little joke. To us, it seems very classical and removed. And of course, Gandalf smokes a pipe. But to him, it's like, it's, you know, like, it's like these ideas in science fiction, and we can see it now happening with video games, where ideas which are really weird and disjunctive seem super normal. Like, when's the last time you pick up a Japanese video game and it's like a giant goldfish with brass scales and like lizards for eyes, and you're like, yeah, video game, punch, kick. But like, that's an insane character design. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just sort of realizing like what these things, like how weird these inventions are, and making them new and reanimating them for people, which is just really writing. I mean, writing is just saying things like, you know, standing in the shower is turning on a box and rain falls on you, fake rain. I mean, that's like, you're defamiliarizing what's there. And so that you can examine it fresh. And so like a lot of this was just like looking at how weird the idea of an elf is. Like how weird is it, the idea of like, you know, there's a whole class of people who believe in God and they're right.
Yeah.
And you know, like these are weird ideas. And so, and that interested me just as like outside of games, just the strangeness of these fantasy tropes that we take advantage of. And so when I wrote game stuff, it was just like, I think a lot of people look at, like, I've seen a lot of people like get and they go, whoa, this is really out, like Maze of the Blue Medusa. They're like, this is really out there. If you want a traditional dungeon experience, no way. And I'm like, this is a dungeon. Like, there's monsters, there's secret doors, there's traps, there's puzzles, there's riddles. Like, those are what I think of as dungeons. When I actually bought dungeon modules and read them, I was like, what? There's nothing in here. You know, like, for some reason, I think, you know that movie Beyond the Black Rainbow? Panos, he said a great thing, the director. He said, I wanted to make a horror movie that felt like what I thought was in horror movies in the 80s when I saw the VHS boxes.
Okay.
Like, he'd see this picture of like this cool like geometric room with like somebody in a motorcycle helmet and a laser gun, and you'd be like, what's that movie gonna be? And you turn it on, it's just a movie, you know? And I read AD&D Player's Handbook, and it's like, oh, you can have traps, and you can have puzzles, you can have zero gravity rooms, and you can have the factions and the dungeons fighting each other, and you can talk to the monster can be a trick. And I was like, oh my god, look at all this stuff. But then you buy Caves of Chaos, and it's like 8 orcs in this room, 12 orcs in that room. It was like, by the time when I got to the modules, it was a big disappointment. But what I was imagining, I'd been imagining for 20 years in my head, like this fantastic, rich world. And so, those Red and Pleasant Land is a stylized world, but Vornheim and Maze the Blue Medusa are just vanilla fantasy to me. They're just you're just, you know, like there's. It, like, all of that to me is the AD&D Player's Handbook. You know, like the hand of Vecna, we all take it for granted, but it's a fucking hand. You pull off your hand and stick it on your own hand, and it does magic. Like, that's insane.
I think it's really cool that you ask. I think that the real point that Zach has brought up to us, that he asks the questions that people didn't ask, and some of the things were taken for granted. But when you ask them, it starts to be weird. Yeah. And this is the thing. This is really cool. This is one of the things that you're like you said, like about elves, right? This is the basic thing that everybody takes them for granted. But when you ask them, they're like, holy shit, this is some weird stuff. Like, what are they? And this is really cool. So that we don't need to really actually imagine like something even new. It is already there. But when we point out the right things or point in the right direction, it becomes this weird thing. And this is why, like you said about the hand of Vecna, we take it for granted, but it's the hand that we take off.
That's so cool. Yeah,
it's so cool. So Zach, a real interesting thing is happening, at least here. And this is what we were looking at, that there's a lot of OSR gaming going on, right? Old school revival, old school stuff. We want to ask you is, since you're kind of in the middle of these things and you've been there from the very beginning, why do you think that OSR gaming is getting more popular? And is the streaming era, like the things that people are streaming their games, is it somehow affecting the OSR sphere for you?
I think I'll start with why I think it's popular. I think it's popular because
that's a hard question, right?
Yeah, it is, but it's also, I want to think about it and say something that I don't want to say more than I have to, so it's a simple, easy thing to understand and translate. Yeah. I think that it's kind of what I said about how when you look at the things that make up D&D by themselves, they're actually rich. And I think that there's a lot of what happens in terms of both the rules and the settings, that people make more and more stuff. They make the moves more elaborate and the powers more elaborate, and they make the setting and they add like ideas to it, but they're not appreciating like that the fairly simple things that are already there actually have a lot of richness to them, and they're immediately accessible. Like when I show a player, I'm like, you're a fighter, and they're like, they know what to do. Like, they don't have a list of moves, but they also don't have to learn a list of moves, and they think of things to do. And so it's a kind of, it's very accessible, I think, because fantasy ideas to begin with are more accessible than sci-fi in a medium where there's no visuals. Like, if I say Martian, you don't know what the Martian looks like, and I don't, because we imagine different Martians. I say a goblin, we both have a private image of a goblin, so it's a good medium for fantasy. And D&D's, like, old school D&D, like, everyone has a private image of the unicorn and the dragon, you know, and so it's a very accessible thing. And then, you know, when we first started playing, I would say to people like who had no familiarity, I would be like, well, you've seen Lord of the Rings, right? And they're like, oh yeah. I'm like, okay, so that's an orc. And they're like, all right. So this is, so like that is one reason it's accessible, is because the basics of the thing are accessible. I think the rules are nice because you don't have to learn a bunch of moves. You know, you can just be like, this is what I do. And I think for dungeon masters and writers, like author and like, you know, like do-it-yourself authors, it's just that simplicity makes it really easy to concentrate on the writing and the design, because you're not worrying about how many feet the bear has or whatever. You're just like, that's a bear. And then you go about what you're doing. And so it's a really good canvas for just being creative. It's like the difference between like having it's like a pencil. Why are pencils popular? They're simple. You get your idea down fast, you know? Like, you can make a picture with an Etch-a-Sketch or with Photoshop or with lots of more elaborate tools that have more things you can do with them. But pencils haven't gone out of style. Like, people still draw with them because they're a really good way to get your ideas down fast. And so the most creative people who are writing new shit independently tend to be happy with old school because they're not worried. They don't want to have to make a stat block or design powers around things as much. They want to just be like, what's an interesting idea? What's an interesting story? What's an interesting place? In terms of streaming, I think there's a complicated relationship of like recent history to the development of the old school scheme, in the sense like 4th edition of D&D was unpopular in the US, relatively unpopular, and
it was unpopular everywhere.
I mean, I don't know, yeah, but it was relatively unpopular. This is what I hear from people inside the company and out, and it was and so, but it was also very, at the time that old school blogs started, they were kind of seen as in opposition to the official Dungeons & Dragons, which was 4th edition. And so there was a sort of shitty antagonism where they would fight with each other, which I always thought was stupid. Like, I was like, 4E is kind of a cool game. It just, I would love it if it was like a kung fu game. Like, to me, it always made sense as like a...
This is a great phrase. I'm going to cut this out. This is cool. I never thought about it, putting it this way. Simple and easy. A kung fu game.
Yeah.
That's great, Zach.
Like, to me, if the 4th edition had been sold as like, it was the, like, Oriental Adventures is what they used to call it, and but if it would have been sold as like a wuxia, like a samurai ninja thing, like a separate thing, everyone would be like, this is a great game, But it just wasn't it was presented rather than as a brand new thing. It was presented as being like, oh, this is what you have instead of what you used to have. Mm-hmm. And people were like, oh, but I used to have all these things I like. And so, and it had, a different design ethos in a lot of ways. And so there was always this sort of imaginary opposition that had to be between 4th and old school games, rather than just being like, these are 2 different games for 2 different things, but whatever. Mm-hmm. So because of that, when they announced 5th edition D&D, and even worse, they announced that I was working on it, because I was a consultant on that, the 4th edition people flipped their shit. They were like, this is going back to the old school, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So even though to a lot of people who are new, like old school D&D is one thing and 5th edition is like a whole other thing, mm-hmm. within the people who are obsessing about it online, 5th edition was considered like a return to a classic.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Kind of D&D. And so the streaming, which has made 5th edition very popular, or they've become popular together, mm-hmm. Has, I think, somewhat opened the door to people looking at old school. It's opened the door on all role-playing games in a certain mm-hmm. sense, which is great. Like, it's made a lot of people go back to role-playing. But I think that for various reasons, the most interesting content is the old school stuff. Like, the people who are writing the best adventures modules, even people who hate OSR in general and hate the rules, they're buying our modules in droves. Okay. You can look at, like if you look at like a random angry message board and you go, what are the best new adventures and modules? They will be like, well, I hate these people, but because that's where old school people concentrate their energy, is making modules and making content, so and the writing and the art. And so it's like these are the people who kind of do that one thing a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I think that a rising tide lifts all boats. But I also think that 5th edition, at least for a certain segment of the audience, is kind of more old school than you'd expect. And of course, like, the people who work there, like Satine Phoenix was in my game group, mm-hmm. So she's working there, and like Richard Witter is like the art director, like he, we talk, and like all those guys read old D&D stuff, mm-hmm. and so we have there's communication, and it's like they're making one thing and we're making another, but I think that there's definitely opportunities for overlap.
Yeah.
So they're connected.
Definitely, OSR is something for us. One of our most popular streams, which Alex is DMing, is a nice DCC game. So that we do, I think it's pretty awesome, and people enjoy it. I never thought that this kind of we experimented. We just recently started doing it, and I think people loved it, even for streams. So 5e isn't the only thing that you can do in a nice way for stream, mm-hmm. so it's compatible, I guess. And I think OSR can be even better sometimes, because for storytelling, at least for streaming. So it's a great thing.
Yeah, I think that Matt Finch does the same game in both. Like he does a campaign. He did Swords and Wizardry, but he does so like on Mondays he does the campaign in 5th edition, and then on Tuesdays he does the same campaign with Swords and Wizardry. Mm-hmm. So you can see the differences.
That's cool. Yeah. That's a pretty cool thing. All right, Zach. You know what? We're gonna kind of tie it up, and I have my last little question for you is the following: is that where do you think that the OSR movement is moving, and where's tabletop RPG in general moving towards to? What have you seen? What have been the changes? What will we see in the future?
Well, what I notice, number one, is just in the last 2 years, so many independent things, and they're of high quality, because the kind of printing you can do now is you can make a print book that looks as good or better than what you're going to buy from a big company with 3 guys, 3 people. So you're seeing, and the independent content is winning awards, and a lot of the big companies are not winning them. Like Starfinder came out this year from Paizo. Like, so it's like, that's Pathfinder, it's like a D&D clone, and then they did, Starfinder. So it's like you'd expect them to do really well. They won like almost no awards at the Ennies this year. Like, I was really shocked, and it was like they were almost shut out, and all of these independent products were winning. So I think that when the way people discover streams and they YouTube, it makes them a little bit more engaged, because they realize that they can't go to. I mean, a lot of media in games used to be funneled through corporate outlets. Like when I was a kid, I wouldn't know about a game thing unless it was on the shelf at my store. Even then, I would probably ignore it if it was on the wrong shelf. Or it was in Dragon Magazine, which TSR owned. That's how I found out about things, period. Whereas now people are used to the idea that they go on YouTube and they search around for things themselves, and they go on forums and find out where to go on YouTube. So I think that people are used to ordering things all the time online. They just go click, click, click. The idea of going to the store is insane. So I think that the door is open for independent products of higher quality, and I think more people are going to make those. And what I don't know if this is true because this just began, but I just did Demon City, which is not really an OSR. It has an OSR ethic. Like, I want it to be about a lot of the same things, but the rules aren't from anywhere else. They're brand new rules, And I'm working on another game at the same time, which is like a superhero game. And that one is based on Demon City. And so again, it has like rules that don't, they aren't AD&D compatible. They aren't even based on like any kind of 80s rule set. And so I think that, and there are probably other authors who are from the old school who are doing the same thing. Like, they're making new games that are informed by the sort of like, make it difficult, make it a challenging game, make it hard to play but fun to solve problems, and make a lot of creative content. And they're probably going to branch out and make other things. So I think that that's where things are headed. I think the downside of that is all the people who are making those books were giving you free shit on the internet all the time. Like, before that, they had these blogs. So I think it's important, if you're into that stuff now, and especially if you're just getting into it, just realize there's 10 years of free shit online still. Like, a lot of your problems, a lot of the questions you might have, or just content you want, like, it's already there. Like, there's one page on this thing called Abulafia. It's like an automatic random table generator. And whenever we eat in my game, like, the players are like, oh, I'm going to have something to eat at the end. You just press a button, and it's got a menu, like a fantasy menu.
Yep.
Like, that's maybe the last thing you would ever make, but every other thing up till that has already been made. Like, there's so many cool resources online, and so I hope that in the shuffle, for people to get their stuff out there and get their work seen, that we don't lose track of all the cool free stuff that and the generosity of people making that. So yeah, and I think that, I guess the big question is, like, other than that, is like, what's the next big mainstream company going to do? Because, Star Wars is still, Fantasy Flight still has Star Wars. Yep. The DC and Marvel licenses are out of, nobody has them. Dungeons and Dragons is probably, WotC's probably going to keep just doing D&D and nothing else. Starfinder doesn't look like it's super successful. And Fantasy Flight just put out a new Warhammer game. Yeah. Shadowruns and Rifts are kind of nowhere. We don't know how Vampire's going to do. I think, like, the next big question is, like, will any of those, because now there's all this attention, like, will any of those games, like, develop, or will the next big cool new thing come from the underground?
Okay. So that's
just
something new. All right, I think Zach. On this note, we're gonna end up our little interview. We're gonna see who's gonna come out from the underworld. Let's call it that way. I hope maybe it will be one of your stuff, Zach. We really do hope so. We do like your way of coming to the question and how you design the books. We definitely look forward for bigger projects from you. So let me stop the beautiful recording, and we can just chat.
Hello! Hello, comrades. How are you?
Hello, everyone. This is first прямой эфир. Всем привет, ребята, еще раз.
Да, давно не виделись.
Давно не виделись. Сейчас можем сделать вопросы и ответы, если у кого-то есть какие-то вопросики по интервью, по ОСР, по вообще вещам, связанные с интервью. Сань, какие вещи, которые Зак рассказывал, были тебе интересны?
На самом деле, честно сказать, весь разговор довольно интересный получился. Человек умеет интересно высказывать свои мысли, имеет мнение по поводу каждого вопроса, да, который мы обсуждали. Это довольно интересно. То есть мне очень понравилось его, на самом деле, объяснение причин популярности OSR, то есть Old School Revival, да, почему люди создают контент для этого, для этой тусовки, почему людей привлекают игры, почему людей привлекают правила из OSR тусовки. И вообще, очень интересно пообщаться с таким человеком, мне кажется, да? Такой человек искусства, в полном смысле слова.
Да, с ним, у меня такое ощущение было, что я уже последние 4 дня только и печатаю эти субтитры. Тяжело, конечно, иногда, когда общаешься, тогда все нормально, да, когда человек пробует выразить.
А что тебя запомнилось больше всего?
Мне больше всего, наверное, та же тема. Первым же делом мне очень много подвело то, как он беспокоился о том, что книга должна быть ценной. То есть как он рассказывал о том, что про эти линии контент забивают просто ненужными вещами куча RPG книг, которые ты открываешь, и оно бесполезное, оно тебе не нужное.
Да, на самом деле, то есть, ты держал в руках Vornheim, да, то есть каждый клочок бумаги используется с какой-то целью, он несет какой-то смысл, какую-то нагрузку и так далее. И точно так же в Red and Pleasant Land, скоро мне приедет. Там точно так же, то есть каждый клочок бумаги используется с максимальной эффективностью какой-то. То есть дизайн технический, верстка, все очень грамотное. Плюс к этому оно все еще нагружено этим фирменным артом и просто долбанутым гейм-дизайном, Зака фирменным. То есть мне это очень нравится.
Еще мне интересную такую вещь. Для меня даже, может, это не новизна, но как-то оно меня более сконцентрировало на то, что когда он сказал о том, что он вовсе не делает странные фэнтези, он просто задает правильные вопросы.
Да, это тоже очень.
И это очень клево, потому что это очень много в геймдизайне. Он тоже подмечает то, что очень много людей делают контент.
Да.
Очень много контента, в самом деле, сам базовый контент, который у нас уже, он базируется на AD&D, да, всем. И что многие просто графоманят, просто делают какой-то контент, какие-то силы выдумывают, но оно нафиг все не нужно, на самом деле оно не нужное. И как мне как он про руку век наговорил, я почему-то и даже.
Да, то есть такая банальщина, которую ты считаешь в принципе нормальной и обыденной, да, если задуматься, про руку век. Ты берешь руку лича, отрубываешь свою руку, представляешь руку лича, и ты получаешь какие-то силы. Если задуматься об этом, ты такой...
Блин, это же полный
это ж надо было ЛСД обожаться, чтобы придумать, серьезно.
Да, то есть это такие
да, так что такой парень, этот Зак Смит, Зак Саббат, он же... Ребята, если у вас есть какие-то вопросы, мы сейчас поболтаем с вами, пообсуждаем. И я думаю, на этом мы обрежем наше видео на Ютубе, конечно же, нет.
Как всегда.
Да.
Слушай, знаешь что еще? Я сейчас подумал, Demon City это же какой-то, я так понял, все, что ему не приняли в Швеции на V5, да, это его личный World of Darkness.
Мне кажется просто, что пока он обдумывал какие-то идеи для V5, у него появились просто куча идей, которые он захотел сам реализовать. И на самом деле, мое первое впечатление от Кикстартера Demon City, оно очень своеобразно, необычно, долбануто, по-хорошему долбануто просто, и такой знаешь, World of Darkness здорового человека, я бы сказал, или World of Darkness для взрослых людей. То есть он очень такой матерый, он очень такой брутальный, грязный, Ну, мне понравился.
Я понял. Окей, если нету никаких особых вопросов по этой теме, может, мы можем еще рассказать о том, что интересную тему он тоже поднимает о том, потом это может как-то связываться, например, с нашим интервью, который недавно был с Стэном, о том, что он очень, ну, как бы, чуть-чуть, ну, мне такое ощущение, это мы на такой ноте остановились, чуть чуть много о том, что нельзя, ну, как бы, тяжело это издавать все, и вот наоборот, сейчас на Западе очень много независимых, типа, изданий, вообще просто, ну, мы с тобой очень много раз говорили, что весь Kickstarter приполнен просто, ну, именно на ролл-плей. Вообще, ну я каждый день заходишь, и там что-то новое, оно забивается.
Хороший вопрос от Фира. Можно ли считать то, что придумано для Ноя чем-то новым и графоманией по версии Зака, или это своеобразное переосмысление? Тут так, чтобы, ну, перефразировать Зака и, ну, более доступно попытаюсь объяснить, речь шла скорее о выдумывании каких-то дополнительных вот переусложнении правил, придумывании каких-то новых способностей, заклинаний, умений.
Еще больше кидать.
Суперсил и так далее, и так далее, и так далее. То есть речь идет о фитах, речь идет о паверах из 4-й редакции, речь идет о обилках, которыми нас заваливают в Pathfinder с каждым новым уровнем, речь идет о классовых умениях, которые мы получаем в 5-ре и так далее, и так далее. То есть все эти вещи, которые на нас сверху нагружают для того, чтобы нам больше разнообразности какой-то добавить. Но при этом ОСР подходит к этому с абсолютно другой стороны. Если это все к хренам выбросить, мы получим намного больше свободы.
Ну, то есть он еще говорит о том, что как часть, ну, то есть есть вот большое яблоко геймдизайна, да, и он говорит, что в OSR откидывают вот эти вот, типа, правильные, ну, типа, механику.
Лишнюю
механику не используют и больше концентрируются на то, чтобы написать хорошую историю или хорошие
креативности,
идеи.
Да, так что, ну, на самом деле, сеттинг иной, который вот...
Это не новые правила.
Да, мы фактически не придумывали правил. То есть...
Ну да, это в прямом смысле просто... Новое место, новая идея.
Да.
То есть, не знаю.
Так, у меня вопрос, как играть в Red and Pleasant Land? Купил, лежит на полке, не играю. Ну, попробуй, что ли, почитай, поиграй.
Я даже не знаю, как на это ответить.
Так, это фруктовый зад, это сеттинг просто, ну, как бы, такой. Линк с ЦЦ плюсую, стрим по DCC, где были просто бомжи-убийцы, смотрелся намного веселее, чем другие стримы. Ну, блин, тут просто штука в чем, знаешь, когда тебе не нужно запариваться на правилах, у тебя больше... ты больше фокусируешься просто на том, чтобы, не знаю, рассказать историю и больше как-то, не знаю, вывалить на игроков больше каких-то, я не знаю, блин, чисто, знаешь, чистого творчества, что ли, какого-то.
Как мы очень много раз говорим, чтобы не надо выдумывать велосипед, каждый имеет свой... как это... Боже, я забыл слово. Свое предназначение.
Да, конечно.
С DCC ты можешь что-то одно делать.
Ну, просто, скажем так, в DCC ты не поиграешь в серьезную кампанию, потому что когда твои персонажи умирают от того, что, типа, там, не знаю, поскользнулись на корове или лепехе, короче, и провалились в подземелье, типа, упали на колья, короче, и умерли, то это как-то не очень эпично, поэтому...
Ну да, то есть каждый раз как-то по-другому можно к этому подходить, я не знаю... Наверное. Ладно, давай будем потихонечку, я думаю, сворачиваться. Я думаю, что мы увидим еще кого-то еще, может, как-то на наших фритоксах мы поговорим. Я знаю, что это тяжелый формат, и люди, которые читают субтитры, которые мы тут всей командой делаем, это клево. Так что я надеюсь, что вам понравилось. Увидимся тогда когда? На скелетной пехоте, ё-моё, во вторник.
Когда? Во вторник?
Во вторник. В 9 вечера по Москве приходите. У нас будет история о том, что...
О чмошной скелетной пехоте.
О чмошной скелетной пехоте. Что же происходит там, в подземелье, пока все приключенцы спят.
Да.
Увидимся в следующий раз.
Пока.